How God uses exposing narcissists to set you free. There comes a time in every journey when God, in His mercy, pulls back the curtain, not to embarrass, but to enlighten. When He exposes a narcissist in your life, it's not an act of punishment, it's an act of deliverance. You see, God will allow the masks to fall, not to create chaos, but to bring clarity. The very people you thought were sent to help you may have been the ones silently holding you hostage, and when truth is revealed, it hurts. But that pain is often the first sign of your freedom. Because God is more committed to your destiny than your comfort, He will disturb your peace to restore your purpose. Today, we're not just talking about exposure, we're talking about liberation. God will often uncover what you tolerate, not to shame you, but to show you your hidden chains. There is a powerful truth that many overlook in the process of healing and deliverance. God doesn't expose what you hate. He exposes what you've been tolerating. The things we despise are obvious to us, but the things we endure silently in the name of loyalty, love, or even religion are often the most dangerous to our soul. These hidden chains are not made of iron but of silence, compromise, and misplaced hope. And so, in His divine strategy, God allows the mask of narcissism to fall, not to embarrass you, not to humiliate the other person, but to bring to light the very thing you've been defending while it's been destroying you. The narcissist in your life, whether a friend, family member, partner, or leader, may have appeared as a gift at first. They came with charm, promises, and charisma, but slowly your identity began to erode. You found yourself walking on eggshells, shrinking your voice, questioning your worth, and twisting your truth just to keep peace that never truly existed. This is not just emotional confusion, it is spiritual bondage. And God, who is jealous for your destiny, refuses to let you stay chained to a person who feeds off your light while dimming your purpose. When God begins to expose, it often feels like betrayal. We cry out, "Why now?" But heaven is not late, it is strategic. God waits for the moment your spirit is ready to confront what your heart has been excusing. He waits until you've grown weary of surviving in cycles and are ready to step into freedom, no matter the cost. Exposure isn't just about the narcissist's behavior, it's about your boundaries. It's about revealing where your discernment was compromised, where your need for approval opened the door to control, and where your fear of rejection made you a prisoner of manipulation. God is not condemning you, He is awakening you. He is showing you that what you called patience was actually silence in the face of abuse. What you called grace was often just the inability to say no without guilt. And what you called faithfulness may have been fear wrapped in spiritual language. That's why He has to shake the foundation, not to destroy you, but to strengthen you. The enemy often hides behind charisma. He loves to cloak bondage in beauty, but God sees beyond the surface. When you ask for discernment, don't be surprised when He starts revealing what was hidden in plain sight. He will begin to show you patterns, the gaslighting, the control, the entitlement, the manipulation disguised as love. Suddenly, you'll begin to see the lies for what they are. The spell breaks, the fog lifts, and what once felt like love will begin to feel like a cage. That's not cruelty. That's divine clarity. God uses exposure not just to deal with the person, but to deal with the stronghold. Because once the veil is removed, you can no longer play the victim. Now you have responsibility. Now you have choice. Now you have a decision to make. Will you continue to tolerate what God is trying to terminate, or will you step into the painful but powerful process of deliverance? It's important to understand, exposure always comes before elevation. God cannot bless what you refuse to confront. He cannot take you into the next season tied to someone who poisons your soul in private. That's why the shaking had to come. That's why the lies had to be revealed. That's why the moments you tried to suppress kept surfacing. You prayed for purpose, and this is part of the answer. God had to show you what you were surviving so he could show you what you were called to. There is no freedom without truth, and sometimes truth comes wrapped in betrayal. But remember, Judas was necessary for the cross, and so are some exposures necessary for your breakthrough. The narcissist didn't block your purpose. They revealed where you placed your identity outside of God. They became a mirror, not of your worth, but of your wounds, and in that mirror God began to whisper, "This is not who you are, this is not what you deserve, this is not where you belong, so don't resist the revelation." Lean into it, grieve, yes, mourn what was lost, but don't go back to what broke you just because it's familiar. God is setting you free from cycles, not just people. He's breaking agreements you didn't even know you made. Agreements with fear, with rejection, with shame. When God exposes what you tolerate, he is inviting you to a higher standard, not just in relationships, but in how you see yourself. No longer a victim, but a vessel. No longer a people pleaser, but a purpose carrier. No longer chained by someone else's ego, but anchored in divine identity. This exposure isn't punishment, it's preparation. God is not just removing people. He's restoring vision. He's rebuilding your soul, and he's saying, now that you see the chains, let me show you how to walk in freedom. Exposure is heaven's strategy to deliver you from relationships that delay your destiny. There is no greater threat to your divine assignment than a relationship that pulls you in a direction opposite your calling. Some relationships don't come to kill your destiny immediately. They come to delay it slowly. They drain your strength, dilute your focus, and distract you with emotional warfare disguised as love, mentorship, or loyalty. And because the enemy knows he cannot destroy what God has ordained, he sends delays. But when heaven has marked a season for movement, for elevation, for transformation, God will use exposure as his surgical tool to disconnect you from the very thing keeping you stagnant. It may look like a breakup, a fallout, a betrayal, or even a spiritual confrontation. But in the spirit realm, it is nothing short of deliverance. Exposure is not just about information coming to light. It is about divine acceleration being released into your life. Because when you stay tied to people God never assigned, you end up serving roles you were never meant to carry, performing emotional gymnastics for people who never intended to grow with you. That's why God has to step in. That's why he disrupts what you thought was stable, because he sees what it's costing your future. There are times when you pray for God to open doors, to bless your plans, to take you into your next. But what you don't realize is that certain people you're connected to cannot go with you. Not because they're evil in appearance, but because their spirit is in conflict with your purpose. And when that kind of tension exists, God will allow things to erupt, not to cause you pain, but to make the invisible visible. The delays aren't just in your calendar, they're in your soul. They're in the way your energy gets consumed trying to keep peace, explain yourself, defend your growth, or minimize your anointing so someone else doesn't feel insecure. Those delays are in the way you silence your own voice, so you don't offend the narcissist in your life. And all the while, your assignment is waiting. Your next level is waiting. Your impact is waiting. So when God finally exposes what's been blocking the flow, it may feel like a storm, but it's actually your rescue. Heaven doesn't always deliver with angels and miracles. Sometimes it delivers with disruption. Sometimes your freedom looks like losing a friendship you never imagined letting go. Sometimes your healing begins when someone shows their true face and you finally stop explaining away their behavior. God will allow conversations to be overheard, texts to be discovered, attitudes to shift, and masks to fall, not because he wants drama, but because he wants movement. You prayed for destiny, and exposure is heaven's answer. But here's the truth. Deliverance never feels good at first. It often feels like abandonment, heartbreak, confusion. You'll ask, God, why would you let this happen now? But what feels like a loss in the moment is actually a divine release. Because the longer you stay tied to a relationship that's rooted in control, manipulation, or selfishness, the more you compromise your design to preserve a dysfunction. God never creates a person with purpose only to have them waste it managing someone else's ego. So when heaven gets ready to deliver you, it won't always come with comfort. It will come with confrontation. Exposure is confrontation with truth. It strips away excuses and shows you what is, not just what you hoped it would be. And once truth is revealed, God doesn't just want you to see it. He wants you to respond to it, because seeing the problem is not deliverance. Walking away from it is. Letting go of what delays you is. Saying yes to the painful, holy separation is. You don't get to enter your next level carrying the dead weight of someone else's denial. And let's be clear, not everyone who delays your destiny does it with malice. Some people are simply not equipped to walk with you into your future. Their presence was temporary, their role was seasonal, and their influence was only meant for a chapter, not your entire book. But because we are emotional beings, we often hold on to what God is trying to end. So he exposes, he makes it obvious, he makes it so clear that you can no longer unsee it, and then he waits for your obedience, because deliverance is a partnership. You must choose to come out of what God has revealed. Sometimes your purpose is pregnant, but the relationship you're in is barren. And as long as you stay in the wrong place with the wrong person, you'll spend all your time trying to keep alive what God already buried. That's why exposure had to happen. It was heaven's strategy to break you out of delay and launch you into destiny. The pain of seeing the truth pales in comparison to the price of staying in deception. God loves you too much to let you miss your assignment because you're attached to a counterfeit connection. And once he has exposed it, he is calling you to act, not in bitterness, not in revenge, but in boldness, in obedience, and in vision. Because now you know, now you see, and now it's time to move, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, and purposefully. Deliverance through exposure is not just about who walks away from you. It's about who you become after they're gone. When God reveals the counterfeit, it's because he's preparing you for the authentic. There is a divine principle that every believer must come to understand. Before God releases the authentic, he will always reveal the counterfeit. This is not to punish you for being deceived, but to prepare your discernment for what's real. The counterfeit is not always obvious. It often looks like everything you prayed for. It talks the right way, shows up in the right season, carries the right image, and sometimes even uses the right language. But underneath, it's empty of substance and void of covenant. The counterfeit relationship, the counterfeit opportunity, the counterfeit connection, it all comes dressed in light, but serves the agenda of delay, distraction, and disillusionment. And so, in his mercy, God reveals it. Not to shame you, but to show you that you are now ready for more. You are now mature enough to discern the difference between charm and character, between control and commitment, between someone who needs you and someone who values you. When the counterfeit is revealed, it is heaven's declaration that you are no longer who you used to be. You are no longer available for emotional manipulation wrapped in affection. You are no longer entertained by the shallow, because your soul is now hungry for the deep. Sometimes we get angry at God for showing us the truth. We feel betrayed, embarrassed, even foolish. But the truth is, the exposure of the counterfeit is one of the clearest signs that your spirit has outgrown the lie. What used to satisfy you now leaves you empty. What once made you feel chosen now feels like a trap. That shift is not random, it's divine, because God will never give you the authentic until you are healed enough not to sabotage it. The counterfeit is permitted by God to surface your wounds. It comes to reveal the places in you that still crave approval, that still confuse love with performance, that still equate presence with loyalty. The counterfeit teaches you what to never settle for again, and so, when God pulls the curtain back and you see it for what it truly is, don't cling to it in the name of history. Don't mourn it as if it was your destiny. Rejoice, not because of the pain it caused, but because of the purpose it revealed. God doesn't show you the fake just to walk away silently. He reveals it so that you can be redefined. He shows you the counterfeit not just to exit, but so you can enter the real with fresh eyes, with guarded peace, and with unshakable clarity. The enemy wants you to leave the counterfeit broken and bitter, so that when the authentic comes, you reject it out of fear. But God wants you to leave the counterfeit empowered and equipped, so that when the authentic arrives, you recognize it by the Spirit, not by your past pain. That's why He allows the unmasking. That's why the relationship that seemed so promising suddenly collapses. That's why the person who once pursued you with intensity now withdraws. That's why the attention that once made you feel seen now feels like manipulation. The season shifted, the veil lifted, and what was always there, God now allows you to see. You see, the authentic requires a healed vessel. You cannot enter into covenant still bleeding from a counterfeit connection, and so God uses the pain of exposure to sanctify your perspective. He doesn't want you just to leave the wrong person. He wants you to learn from them. He wants you to extract wisdom from the wreckage, strength from the sorrow, and confidence from the confusion. Because once you recognize the counterfeit for what it is, you start to redefine your standards, not from insecurity, but from identity. You no longer tolerate crumbs because you now know what a full table feels like. You no longer chase validation because you now remember who called you. You no longer bend to fit someone's broken mold because you've been reshaped by truth. That's what exposure does. It purifies your expectations so that when the authentic arrives, you no longer question your worth. The authentic may not come with as much noise, but it will carry peace. It may not impress the crowd, but it will speak to your spirit. It won't play games with your time, your heart, or your calling, and when it comes you will know, not because it's perfect, but because it's aligned, because after dealing with the counterfeit, you now value alignment over attraction. You now choose substance over status, and you now know that real love doesn't suffocate your purpose. It supports it. That is why God had to let you see what was false first, so you could make room for what is true. The delay was never denial. It was divine preservation, because giving you the authentic before you were ready would have destroyed both the gift and the giver. So do not despise the season of revelation. Celebrate it, because in the revealing of the counterfeit, heaven is making space for what your soul was truly made for. God never subtracts without planning a greater addition. He doesn't let go of what looks good unless He's about to release what is good. And once you've been through the fire of exposure, you don't come out weaker. You come out wiser. You don't come out angry. You come out anointed. Because now, you don't just want something that looks right. You're waiting for what feels right in your spirit, confirms the word, and pushes you closer to the throne. That's the authentic. And it's worth every revelation, every heartbreak, and every exposure God used to prepare you. Freedom begins when you stop defending what God is dismantling. One of the most painful yet necessary lessons in the journey toward freedom is this: you cannot be set free from what you continue to protect. God, in His infinite mercy, often begins the work of liberation by pulling apart structures we've built our identity around, relationships, systems, affiliations, and connections we once thought were the source of our security. Yet, when God begins to dismantle those very things, many of us resist. We try to hold the walls together, justify the broken pieces, and plead for the restoration of what God is clearly trying to remove. But true freedom doesn't begin with rescue, it begins with surrender. It begins the moment you stop defending what is killing your purpose, the moment you stop explaining away manipulation as misunderstanding, the moment you stop calling abuse a rough season, the moment you stop labeling cycles of control and emotional dysfunction as just how they are. That's when healing begins. That's when clarity floods in. That's when the chains that were wrapped in loyalty and silence start to break. Because as long as you fight to keep what God is tearing down, you remain bound by your own agreement with dysfunction. God cannot free the heart that is still trying to protect the prison. Many people miss their deliverance not because God didn't make a way of escape, but because they kept defending the enemy inside the camp. They kept covering for the narcissist. They kept lying to themselves about what it really was. They kept trying to repaint red flags into spiritual tests. But at some point, God will let the tower fall. He will allow the cracks to become earthquakes. He will expose what's been hiding behind the image, and it will shake you. But the shaking is grace. The shaking is love. Because God loves you too much to let you stay tied to something that's slowly eroding your soul. And when the dismantling begins, it's not just external, it's internal. He begins to dismantle the version of you that needed that relationship to feel valuable. He begins to dismantle the mindset that told you your worth was dependent on your ability to keep broken people happy. He begins to tear down the altar you built to people's opinions. That is not destruction. It is divine renovation. And the longer you try to defend the rubble, the longer you delay the rebuilding of your life. There comes a moment when God's silence turns into revelation. The quiet nudges in your spirit become undeniable convictions. You begin to hear God say, "Let it go, walk away. This is not where I called you to be." And yet, fear rises. What if I'm wrong? What if they change? What if I never find better? And in that fear, we often slip into defense mode, defending them, defending ourselves, defending a future that doesn't even exist. But freedom will cost you your excuses. It will demand your honesty. It will require you to stand in the rubble of what you thought was love and admit, this was never healthy, this was never holy, this was never God's best for me. That level of truth is uncomfortable. It strips you, it exposes your own compromises, but it also liberates you. Because the moment you stop defending what God is dismantling, you allow Him to build something in you that cannot be shaken. Narcissistic relationships are especially deceptive because they feed on your need to be good, to be kind, to be forgiving. And in your effort to be godly, you become trapped in a cycle of tolerating what God is telling you to confront. You mistake silence for peace and endurance for virtue, when in reality you are suppressing your discernment in the name of false humility. But God does not call you to be abused in the name of love. He doesn't call you to lose yourself so someone else can feel powerful. And when He begins to pull you out, you'll be tempted to defend the very thing He's trying to deliver you from. You'll want to explain their behavior, justify their patterns, make excuses for their manipulation. But freedom comes when you look at the truth without flinching and say, no more. No more twisting myself to fit what's broken. No more lowering my voice to protect someone else's pride. No more compromising my peace to avoid conflict. That's not love. That's bondage. And God didn't send his Son for you to stay chained under the weight of someone else's brokenness. You must understand this deeply. Defending dysfunction delays destiny. Every time you speak up for what God is tearing down, you give power to the very thing trying to destroy you. Every time you minimize the abuse, you prolong your healing. Every time you fight for a version of the relationship that never truly existed, you hold yourself hostage to fantasy. And God cannot bless your fantasy. He can only bless the truth. That's why he has to dismantle it in front of you. That's why he lets the mask fall. That's why the lies get exposed. Not to shame you, but to give you the gift of clarity. Because once you stop defending it, you can finally grieve it. And once you grieve it, you can finally heal. And once you heal, you can finally rise. Not just as someone who survived, but as someone who sees. Someone who is no longer confused by charm. Someone who no longer equates love with struggle. Someone who has reclaimed their voice and their vision. You see, freedom isn't just about leaving the relationship. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away trying to keep it. It's about standing in your truth, even if it costs you connection. It's about being willing to disappoint others so you can obey God. And sometimes it's about saying yes to peace, even if it means walking alone for a season. Because when you stop defending what God is dismantling, you start building on what God is establishing. You begin to construct your identity not on survival, but on sonship. You start to see that your value was never in what you endured, but in what you were created for. That is where freedom lies. Not in the applause of others, not in the reconciliation of every broken tie, but in the deep, holy resolve to follow God forward no matter who or what you have to leave behind. So let the dismantling happen. Don't rush to fix what God is unbuilding. Don't spiritualize what God is severing. Don't hold up idols with emotional duct tape just because you're afraid to face the silence. Trust him. Trust that the God who is pulling this apart is the same God who holds your future in his hands. Trust that the exposure was not the end, it was the beginning. And trust that if he's removing it, he's preparing something greater. Your freedom is not in defending what was. It's in embracing what is, and believing for what will be. God doesn't expose to destroy. He exposes to realign you with purpose and truth. When God begins to expose something or someone in your life, it is easy to assume that destruction is coming, that something is ending beyond repair, that the very foundation you've been standing on is being torn down with no plan for restoration. But the truth is deeper than that. God is not a destroyer of his children. He is a refiner, a restorer, a redeemer, and his method of exposure is not rooted in punishment, but in purpose. It is not driven by wrath, but by the desire to realign you with truth. God exposes not to crush you under the weight of what's been hidden, but to deliver you into the clarity of what is real. He reveals so that he can redirect. He tears the veil so that what was clouding your vision can no longer hinder your forward motion. Exposure is not the end. It is the divine beginning of alignment. It is the gentle yet unrelenting pull of heaven repositioning your feet, correcting your course, and bringing you back to the original blueprint he wrote over your life before the foundations of the world were ever laid. We often fear exposure because we associate it with shame, but God doesn't expose to shame. You must let that go. Shame is from the enemy. Exposure from God is an act of love. It's how the Father rescues you from deception. including the deception you might have unknowingly partnered with. It's how he lifts the fog from your spirit so you can stop walking in circles and finally step into destiny. That narcissistic relationship, that toxic friendship, that manipulative mentor, that abusive covering, none of it was ever meant to define you. But for a season, you may have believed it did. You may have constructed your identity around the praise or rejection of someone who never saw you rightly. You may have learned to shrink, to perform, to conform, to please, just to keep peace in a place God never called peaceful. So when he exposes it, it feels like chaos, but it's actually alignment. Alignment always begins with a shake. When God realigns your life, he must first remove the counterfeit supports, the false affirmations, the voices that led you away from him while pretending to speak for him. And yes, it may break your heart to discover that what you thought was sacred was actually a snare. But it is better to face that heartbreak now than to live in silent bondage for the rest of your life. Realignment means that what no longer fits must be adjusted or removed. And for many of us, God is not just exposing people. He is exposing patterns. He is exposing beliefs, assumptions, agreements you've made deep in your soul. Agreements like I have to earn love, or if I speak up, I'll be abandoned, or I'm only valuable when I'm useful. These lies may have attached themselves to your spirit through relationships that mimic truth but trafficked in control. And when those relationships are exposed, it's not just about seeing the other person for who they truly are. It's about seeing yourself more clearly, seeing where you've settled, seeing where you've given away authority, seeing where your discernment was overridden by your desperation to belong. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. That's why God reveals, because when your eyes are opened, your spirit is no longer under the influence of the lie. You are free to choose truth, free to walk in identity, free to live in alignment. And what is alignment if not coming into agreement with who God says you are and where he says you're going? Exposure clears the path for that. It's not an interruption, it's a correction. Just like a chiropractor must make a necessary adjustment to a spine that's been out of line, God makes spiritual adjustments when your walk has drifted from the path of purpose. He doesn't do it to harm you. He does it so you can walk without pain, without limping through life because of unresolved soul ties or emotional shackles. You see, God is far more interested in your alignment with truth than your comfort with image. He would rather you cry in truth than smile in deception. He would rather you go through the fire of clarity than stay numb in false peace, because the pain of exposure is temporary, but the fruit of realignment is eternal. It produces wisdom, discernment, and a deep, unshakable conviction about who you are and who you're not. The exposure of a narcissist in your life is not just the removal of a person. It's the removal of a false narrative. That narrative may have told you that love looks like constant sacrifice with no reciprocation. That spiritual leadership looks like control. That submission means silence. That loyalty means ignoring your own intuition. But when God exposes the root, he is inviting you into wholeness. He's saying no more cycles, no more pretending, no more carrying the weight of dysfunction and calling it strength. He is clearing the ground so he can rebuild your foundation on truth. Because only truth can carry the weight of your calling. Only truth can sustain your anointing. And God is too committed to your destiny to let you build it on lies. So don't fear exposure. Don't run from it. Don't deny it or downplay it. Lean into it. Ask God what he is showing you about yourself through what was revealed. Ask him what beliefs need to be broken, what wounds need to be healed, what boundaries need to be built. Because when God exposes something, He is also inviting you to partner with him in healing. He doesn't just pull the curtain back, he also opens the door forward, but it's a door that only truth can unlock. You must choose to walk through it with open eyes and a willing heart. That is alignment, that is freedom, that is restoration. God is not out to destroy you. He is out to restore you to the version of yourself that existed before the world got its hands on you. Before trauma shaped your theology, before manipulation warped your discernment, before shame silenced your roar, he is bringing you back to the garden, the place of identity, authority, intimacy, and purpose. That's what this exposure is about. It's not about judgment. It's about justice. Not about humiliation, but about elevation. You've been praying for clarity, for purpose, for destiny, and God is answering, not with lightning from heaven, but with truth right in front of your eyes. What you do with that truth determines everything. Will you grieve it or grow from it? Will you cling to the lie or embrace the liberation? Will you defend what hurt you or step boldly into what heals you? This is the moment where alignment meets decision. Choose truth, choose healing, choose freedom, because once God exposes what was never meant to remain, he is ready to release what he always intended for you to walk in. And nothing, no narcissist, no betrayal, no season of confusion, can stop what happens next when you say yes to truth.